Shall okay. Hello, good evening, everyone. Warm welcome to you all to the Mysuru Global Forum, that is International Weekly Panel Discussion, which is organized by the Department of International Relations, Maharajas College, University of Mysore, and BRICS Institute, India. This initiative has been taken to motivate the students to understand about the multipolar world order, global politics, global order, global trade, global economy, and defense, and strategy and security, and diplomacy, and moreover, ongoing issues in international relations. Under this platform, that is Mysuru Global Forum, we had a discussions on China's stand towards Russia-Ukraine war. It is happy to say that today we have Professor Jain, the great orator and eminent scholar and star person in the field of international relations, to discuss on Russia's Ukraine war, India's strategic dilemma, and Quad, how Quad will see the Russia-Ukraine issues. To understand about the India's diplomacy, how India is taking a stand towards Russia-Ukraine war. India strictly and firmly believing in the principle of neutrality. Accordingly, India is balancing the relation among the Quad countries and the rest of the other countries. So, I feel very happy to welcome for today's great orator, Professor Jain, for our international panel discussion. Sir, I'm very happy to invite you, sir. Warm welcome to you, sir. I hope our students will be gaining the knowledge from the experience of Professor Jain. And now we also have Brigadier Rajkumar, who is having a personal experience in the field of war. He will be as an discussant in our panel discussion. Sir, it is immense pleasure to me. Welcome to you for our panel discussion. And it is incredible moment to me, and it's a great honor to me to welcome our Dr. Binod Singh, who is co-organizer, and also who is giving a constant support to me, making our program successful. Sir, you also warmly welcome to our international panel discussion, sir. With this, I don't want to take much time because today's topic is very important. Our students also very eager to understand about the Quad and how Quad is working on this and how India is balancing the relations. With this, I will leave the platform to Dr. Binod Singh. Sir, platform is yours.
Thank you, ma'am. It's a great honor that we are connected from from Australia and India. So we are not able to follow the complete protocol because of our resources. Professor, this platform is not qualified enough for Professor Jain to speak. So he is very kind that he accepted our invitation, maybe due to personal reasons or maybe due to something he wants to give back to his homeland. So we all pay a standing ovation to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And before we start the speech today, as per our protocol here, we have one of our colleague, Renuka Chaudhary. She will be reading out a very the briefest profile we could manage today in our time. So please bear with us. Thank you. Renuka ji, please do the honor on behalf of BRICS Institute and University of Mysore.
Firstly, I would like to introduce myself. I am Renuka Hiramat. I welcome you all to today's international panel discussion on Russia's Ukraine war, India's strategic dilemma, and the Quad. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, Professor Purnendra Jain. Purnendra Jain is Emeritus Professor in the Department of Asian Studies at the University of Adelaide in Australia. He is also visiting fellow at JICA Ogata Research Institute, Tokyo. His main research has focused on contemporary Japanese politics and foreign policy. He has also researched and written extensively on Japan-India, Japan-South Asia, Australia-Asia relations, regionalism and regional institutions, energy and foreign aid issues, comparative studies of the politics and foreign policy of Japan, China, and India. His research results have been published in journals such as Asian Survey, Pacific Review, International Relations of the Asia Pacific, Japan Forum, Japanese Studies, Global Asia, Australian Journal of International Affairs, Asian Journal of Comparative Politics, and many more. He teaches courses related to politics, public policy, and international relations of contemporary Japan, Australia's relations with the Asia Pacific region, regionalism and regional institutions, rise and fall of nation states, and comparative studies of politics and foreign policy of Japan, China, and India. He has successfully supervised many honors, masters, and doctoral students. He is a former president of the Japanese Studies Association of Australia, Asian Studies Association of Australia, and co-convener of the 9th International Convention of Asian Scholars, Adelaide. Sir has published several journals, books, and conference papers. He has successfully completed more than 20 projects. Recently, he published a book on Japan's foreign policy in the 21st century. His recent project is entitled Foreign Aid Policy and Health Diplomacy in a COVID World, exploring Australia-Japan cooperation in the Indo-Pacific era. I would like to mention some of his recent publications. Hesitant Realism, China-India border tensions, and Delhi's deepening strategic ties with Tokyo and Canberra. China, Japan, and India, Asia's tangled triangle in a disrupted world. I am pleased to say that in 2020, Sir was awarded the Japanese Imperial Order of the Rising Sun Gold Race with neck ribbon for his contribution to Japan studies. So we can see the Sir's award. We are displaying this on the slide share. And in 2021, he was elected a fellow of the Australian Academy of the Humanities for his scholarship in Japan studies. Sir, there is no doubt that your enormous work is a motivation for all of us to work hard and dedicate to research in making a difference. We all are really glad to have you here with us, sir. I once again welcome you to the discussion. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Renuka, for your very generous introduction. And greetings, everyone from Adelaide, Australia. Some of you may not know where Adelaide is, but if you are a keen cricket follower, Adelaide has got one of the best cricket stadiums called the Oval. So every time the Indian team comes to Australia, they play in the Oval, and most of the leading cricketers, including Sunil Gavaskar and more recently Kohli, they all very much like this particular venue. Anyway, that was a side, but I would like to thank my friend and colleague, Dr. Binod Singh, director of BRICS Institute, for inviting me to present this talk, and to Dr. Bharati Hiremath for organizing this event on behalf of Mysore University. It's my absolute pleasure to know you and interact with you all, although of course virtually. I'm very happy to see Mr. Raj Kumar. What is your military designation?
I'm a retired army officer, sir. I'm a brigadier.
Okay, brigadier. So thank you very much. I look forward to your comments after I have made my brief comments. With regards to the topic today, I wish to make 3 points, which I will elaborate in my presentation. So these 3 points, number 1 is, I would say that, no other conflict or war since World War II has divided the world as much as it has in the wake of the Ukrainian war, which enters its almost 3rd month. Point number two, India faces a serious strategic dilemma in this divided world. And third, in the wake of the conflict, the utility and importance of the Quad has been questioned, especially because of India's stance over the Ukraine war. So what I want to argue in my presentation today is that India, as we know, has followed a policy of multi-alignment and strategic autonomy or independence, which to my mind is a revised version of India's non-alignment. And we can talk about how strategic independence or autonomy is different from non-alignment, but certainly it is related to non-alignment, which has allowed India to walk on both sides of the road, left and right. That is, getting closer to the West and maintaining its deep and time-tested relationship with Russia while diplomatically engaging China. Despite pressure on India to take a firm stand against Russia, India has taken a stance that, in my view, supports its foreign policy objectives. Even if India's position is quietly questioned and even criticized, instead of being isolated and pushed on the periphery, India has turned out to be a much sought-after nation because of its economic as well as its strategic attraction to both Russia, of course, and the West, as well as to China. But the conundrum or the dilemma really is whether India can sustain this position in the long run. Will it eventually align with the West or remain on its course, or as it is following today? That is a big question, and we can debate and argue on that. Let me go through some details. Since most of you are IR students, it is worth considering, in my view, how the current strategic dilemma of India can be explained in theoretical terms, keeping in mind that most IR theories have originated in the West based on their experiences. And one of the dominant explanations of IR theories is the realist explanation, where one school tells us that national interest dominates in international relations. So my question to you, do you think that this is what defines India's foreign policy, especially in the wake of the Ukrainian war and the way India has handled it so far? So let me come to the first point of my 3 points, which I stated in the beginning. So first point is new fault lines, new divisions have appeared. Now, what are these new fault lines and new divisions? One is, we can see that Asia is divided on the Ukrainian war issue. On the other hand, Europe and the United States, they have united on this issue. So I call it Asia divided, Europe and US united. As a matter of fact, one could argue that there are 3 actually divisions. One is those who are pro-Ukraine. We can include Europe, we can, of course, include the United States and its allies, including Australia, which is now my home. The second group is kind of neutral. Some European nations which have followed neutrality, such as Switzerland or Finland, for example. Some Asian and African nations, including India, of course, I would think have taken a kind of neutral position. And then there are some pro-Russian supporters, like, there are not many of them, but like Belarus, for example. China is the main one. One could argue even North Korea, which would see fault with the United States and sympathize with any country which is anti-US. So in this case, maybe North Korea is also with Russia, not clearly stated by the North Korean regime though. So most Asian nations, as I said, barring a few, are not clear-headed about their position on this war. There are some exceptions though, and in the introduction, Renuka said about my Japan studies. So I want to bring here Japan. Japan has given its full support to Ukraine and stands solidly with the United States and Europe against the Russian invasion. One could argue that being a US ally, Japan has little choice but to support the United States and its NATO allies. However, but the picture is more complex, and I don't want to go into talk about Japan too much, but the Russians have reacted so strongly against Japan that the Russian government has announced sanctions against 63 Japanese officials, journalists, and professors who are barred from entering Russia, including the current or the serving Prime Minister, Mr. Fumio Kishida. And it's not just Japan and the Japanese government, but its citizens are strongly in support of Ukraine and have exceptionally donated millions of dollars to Ukraine by fundraising. And in South Korea too, we have seen a similar pattern where private citizens are coming together and in support of Ukraine, and they have also, as a matter of fact, raised quite a bit of money to support the Ukrainians. So in Northeast Asia, all democracies, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, have sided with the United States against Russia and in support of Ukraine. Now, Southeast Asia is completely another story, divided. Singapore is like Japan and South Korea, whereas Indonesia, a much bigger and the largest of Southeast Asian country, has wavered significantly and quite unsure of what it wants to do. We should remember that Indonesia is the current G20 chair and is host of the annual meeting this year in Indonesia. So it has come under immense pressure from the West not to invite Russia to the meeting in November this year. But China and India won't like to exclude Russia. So it is up to Indonesia what it wants to do. But the point is that Indonesia is under pressure from both sides, both pro-Ukrainian and kind of neutral and pro-Russian camps. Then we can look at Vietnam, which is a communist country. It is very much dependent on Russian arms, like India. They are kind of wavering which way to go. Cambodia has close ties with both China and Russia. So in many ways, I would think Vietnam is quite like India in a fix, in a dilemma, in a conundrum, how to deal with this issue. And I want to hypothesize that ideology does not seem to be important in this case. What is driving, views towards Ukraine is essentially national self-interest. That's the dominating factor. So Asian thinking on the Ukrainian war, in my view, is strongly dominated by their own self-interest rather than any ethical, moral, or other considerations. Now, here is also a conundrum for Asian countries, including India. China is the largest trading partner of most of the nations in the Indo-Pacific, including, of course, India. And they depend on China for their own manufacturing. India, for example, sources ingredients from China for its huge pharma companies. I don't want to talk too much about China because I have got a specialist in our panel, and I don't want to, I will leave it to Dr. Binod Singh. But further hesitancy, in my view, comes because China is now a close friend of Russia. Criticizing Russia may not be taken warmly in Beijing. Many Asian nations depend on China economically, as I have said, and for financing their infrastructure projects. I don't know whether you follow, but recently the Solomon Island, which is a very small island very close to Australia, like Maldives for India, in the Solomon Islands, the Chinese have stitched a deal with this Solomon Island, whereby they can use that as a base for their military activities. So China is providing all kinds of incentives to lots of countries, including many in Asia as well. So that is a huge conundrum for many of the countries. So while Asia is divided and split, Europeans have come together as never before and not even expected. It has been a surprising phenomenon that how Europeans have come together in the wake of the European wars. And of course, US and its allies, including Australia, they have come and joined the European forces against Russia and in favor of Ukraine. Now, in the context of Europe, I want to mention that in the post-war period, most wars have happened in broader Asia, including West Asia, starting from the Korean War in the 1950s, then the Vietnam War, and then, of course, our own India-China War in 1962, the Gulf War in 1991, the Iraq War in 2001, and a war in Afghanistan. All these wars have taken place in Asia or West Asia, which is part of Asia or major Asia. But no major and long-drawn war in Europe before the Ukrainian war. I just want to qualify this assertion. Of course, in the Balkans in the 1990s, the Balkans were engulfed in a war that saw the disintegration of Yugoslavia, terrible ethnic cleansing, Serbian genocide, and the NATO bombing of Belgrade and so on and so forth. But let's remember, this was a kind of ethnic war, and this war did not divide Europe and other countries in the same way as the Ukrainian war has. So this is quite significant landmark development in Europe and in the world. So that's my point, which we need to keep in mind. Now, the next point which I want to make here is like Europe is changing quite dramatically. If you look at Germany, for example, Germany announced the largest defense spending since World War II. It is going to raise its defense spending from 1.5% or less than 1.5% to 2%. Countries like Finland, very close to Russian border, Finland, they have been neutral, but now they are seriously considering joining the NATO. Switzerland, which has been a historically neutral nation, has suddenly joined Europe and the US in imposing economic sanctions on Russian banks and financial institutions. Even Sweden and Austria are considering their options. So you can see a plethora of activities happening in Europe in support of Ukraine against Russia. Now let me come to the second point. I'm aware of my time as well. Let me come to the second point, India's strategic dilemma, which is of course an issue closer to home. So indeed, my point or argument would be that this war has led India to a strategic conundrum, and perhaps no other major power faces such a dilemma as does India. However, in my view, India has held on to its position of not siding with any party, as reflected in the abstentions from UN votes on several occasions on sanctions against Russia. Of course, there are other countries also who abstained from those UN votes, from Asia, from Latin America, and from Africa. But India, of course, is a major world power and global player. So what it does has quite significantly, it impacts world politics quite significantly. So in wake of India's position, or because of India's position, there has been pressure put on India from world leaders. And you would know better than I know, sitting here in Adelaide, this can be really understood in terms of the numbers of visits by top foreign dignitaries to India in March and April and continuing. For example, the three Quad members, the Japanese Prime Minister Mr. Kishida went to New Delhi and had in-person, face-to-face discussion and meeting with Prime Minister Modi. Then Australian Prime Minister Mr. Morrison had a virtual meeting with Mr. Modi. And also President Biden had a virtual meeting with Modi. So these are the three other Quad members who were kind of quietly trying to talk through India and trying to assess whether India can change its position. Of course, India stood steadfast on its own position and not giving an inch to these countries on this issue. Then we have Prime Minister of Britain, Mr. Johnson. He visited India. He came to India. So there is kind of persuasion campaign globally to put pressure on India from Japan, UK, Australia, US, and elsewhere. Interestingly, the Chinese foreign minister, sorry, Binod, for bringing China. The Chinese foreign minister Wang Yi also came to India. I guess perhaps his motivation was not to do with anything with the Ukraine war, but to convince Modi to be present at the BRICS summit next month, which will happen next month. As China hosts this summit this year, and we know that India hosted this BRICS summit. Sorry, I'm talking in front of Binod Singh, director of BRICS. He can enlighten us on that point. Then the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, came to India, perhaps in my view, to thank India for supporting Russia. So the world is quoting India for different purposes from different quarters, and India never had this kind of courtship from the world. So the Ukraine crisis has put India into the limelight, global limelight, as never before India was given that limelight. Okay. Have I missed some? Did I lose my connection? Am I there? Can
All
you
okay,
still hear
sir.
me?
All
Okay,
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 sir.
sir.
All okay.
Okay, I thought I lost my connection. Anyway, so that's something which I wanted to highlight, and very important, that how India is being quoted by world leaders from everywhere and from all kinds east, west, north, south. So India is in a very good position at the moment. Now let me come to the third point, that is the Quad and India and what is India's position. I have actually very recently published a long paper on India and the Quad, which was published by a think tank in Singapore called, the journal name is East Asia Policy, which was published only last month, actually in January-March 2022 edition, where I outline India's Quad journey. So if you are interested, if you want to read that, please let Vinod Singh know, and I can send a copy to him. Actually, copyright of this journal tells me not to circulate freely, but for academic purposes, we can do that. I won't be breaking any copyright rules.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So yeah, you are most welcome. So here I want to make some key points. I don't want to repeat what I have already said in that paper, but want to make some key points for your consideration. So initially, when Quad was formed, actually the Quad has two lives. First was kind of stillborn. Well, not stillborn. It was born and then it went into deep sleep, and then it woke up again in 2017. Both times, India was rather hesitant, and in my view, a little reluctant to embrace the Quad fully and tightly. We all know Modi's hug, so that's why I'm using the word tightly, embracing tightly. He didn't embrace the Quad very tightly. Reasons being, the three other Quad partners, the United States, Australia, and Japan, have been in military alliance for a long time, whereas India, as we know, is not in any alliance relationship with any nation whatsoever. India, in fact, won't like to be seen as a member of a grouping that would be construed as an alliance of some sort, and that made India quite reluctant to openly and strongly embracing the Quad. India was also cautious because both China and Russia have opposed and still oppose the Quad. India's position on China has been to engage and negotiate, and Russia, of course, is a time-tested partner of India. So India was naturally very hesitant. But China at one stage had characterized the Quad as a mini NATO of Asia, and wished it away by saying it's like sea foam that would dissipate. But of course, China's wishing away has not matured, and India has now accepted and embraced it, rather willingly and tightly. New Delhi, of course, supports Japan's led vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific, in which, in my view, India plays a key role. The 2020 mini war across the Himalayas with China convinced India to strategically align with the US and Japan in particular. So also, the Quad members have been explaining that it is not any kind of military alliance. It has got broad objectives, but in my view, the underlying text of the Quad is to deal with China collectively, as no one single country is big enough today to tackle China's economic and military objectives single-handedly. So in the wake of the Ukrainian crisis, India's position as a Quad member has been questioned. Biden, after meeting with Mr. Modi, dubbed India shaky on the question of Russian sanctions. So the US view was that India is not taking a clear stand and it is very shaky as to which way it wants to stand. So despite India being a crucial member of the Quad, which also includes the US, Japan, and Australia, as I said, who all condemn Russia for the invasion of Ukraine, as I said before, India has taken a firm stand on not criticizing Russia, at least directly, and not buckling down under pressure from Quad members and other European partners. Now, slowly, I think these nations have come to acknowledge India's stance and its strategic compulsions. Russia still is a major supplier of arms to India, as well as energy, although of course is not huge. Russia is a longtime friend and partner of India. So India cannot, at this stage, afford to cut ties with Russia overnight and align with the US and Europe. Because it's not just arms and resources from Russia. You know, Russia supports India in the UN as a permanent member of the Security Council. While India trusts Japan, New Delhi does not have the confidence in the US, France, and UK, other permanent Security Council members, that they would come to side with India when the penny drops. So we can understand why India has taken that position on Russia. And now other countries understand India's position in clear terms. And that is why they are quoting India, despite the fact that India is not clearly standing against Russia and with the US and Europe. You know, Jayashankar made a very powerful comment at the, I think it was Raisina Dialogue or somewhere. You know, he was talking about rules-based order, what the US and Europeans and Westerners talk about, rules-based order. So he said that the vested rules for thee, but not for me. So the Western countries make rules for others, but they don't follow those rules themselves. That's a very powerful statement. So India has communicated what it thinks of the West, right? In no unclear terms. So India, in my view, will continue, just to conclude, India will continue on its path, continue its course. And what is India's course? Deepening its ties with the EU. And why I'm saying EU, Europe, Mr. Modi recently was in 3 European nations. I think he returned today back in India after touring Germany, Denmark, and France, right? So in all these 3 countries, if you see television footage, I mean, sometimes television footage, selected footage, but you know, the kind of reception he received from those leaders, the kind of reception he received from Indian diaspora in those countries, it just tells something about India's position in the world at the moment. So India will continue on its path, deepening its ties with Europe, the United States, and West as a collective, which includes Australia, which includes Japan to a certain degree as well, and follow its Act East Asia, Act East policy, and engage, but be tough with China and remain a partner to Russia, which will bolster India's multi-alignment and strategic independent policy. Now, in this context, I think it is quite significant. My view is that the Quad, there will be a meeting of the Quad this month, end of this month, in person in Tokyo. And again, the Quad members will try and persuade India, Mr. Modi, that he needs to take a little firmer approach But I think India has not criticized Russia directly, but India has made some statements. And those statements are that India would not like to see any country changing unilaterally a status quo. One. The second point, India has made clear that it doesn't believe in war, it doesn't believe in conflict, so there should be diplomacy and dialogue. So these, one could argue that these are rhetorical statements, but that actually gives some signals that where India is coming from. So the conundrum for India in the medium to long term will be whether India will still be able to walk on both sides of the road. It's very hard for us to walk on the left side and right side at the same time of the road. But India has mastered that skill to be with the US and its allies and be with Russia and engage China. So whether in the medium to long term, whether India is successfully able to pursue that skill is something we need to wait and watch and see and analyze. Thank you again for this wonderful opportunity, and I look forward to comments by Colonel Raj Kumar and Dr. Binod Singh, and any questions which students might have. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much for the enlightening talk, sir. Though I am a soldier at heart, but IR always remains a part of it because no war can be decided on the battlefield. It's ultimately diplomacy which matters. So, what I've taken cue from you, sir, the Quad emerged in 2007 as a common platform from strategy there. But with the Quad, India also joined BRICS. So now again, you said India has been walking on the middle path, and it has walked pretty well, I would say, sir. If you say, being part of BRICS, at the same time being part of Quad and dealing with nations like US and Australia, India has not criticized Russia, but it has always criticized non-violence part of it. So it says those loss of life, that itself is a big thing, sir. And if you say joining or staying with Quad or BRICS, maybe of little consequence, sir, but keeping our most reliable ally on the right side, sir, is very important for us, sir. If you see, you cannot denounce Russia for what it has done, sir. And any violence, sir, we say, like Hindi mein say, tali do haath se bajti hai, sir. This Ukraine-Russia war could have been ended by the European countries if they want. A country like Ukraine without any nuclear weapons surviving for 90 days, which means Ukraine is fighting a war for US, sir. Don't you feel that way, sir? Why blame Russia alone? Similar point had come up in the last week's seminar, sir. He said anyone who feels uncomfortable when somebody else sits in his border is bound to react. Probably Russia reacted because of that, sir. Ukraine for the last so many times was trying to go towards NATO, but NATO didn't want to get them inside. Neither now they want to interfere, but at the same time they are supporting them with all kinds of armaments, so which means indirectly they are interfering in that, sir. So in that context, if you look at it, India staying on the middle path is correct, sir. I would appreciate the Prime Minister, in spite of all pressures from Quad. I don't know how Australia takes India walking the medium path between BRICS and Quad. It's a difficult proposition, sir, and I feel we should continue with that. And considering the Indian markets, which is quite huge, I don't think any nation in the present context will pressurize India to go along to one side, or rather leave its non-alignment path, sir. Otherwise, I'm grateful to you for your insight. It's always an honor to listen to you, sir. Dr. Binod, sir.
Thank you. Can I just add?
Yes, sir.
India's attraction to the world arises from the fact that the world is at war with Russia, especially the Western countries.
Yes, sir.
And they are in serious rivalry with China, right?
Yes, sir.
So, if you use the Cold War terminology, is kind of containment. This is what the Chinese would say containment of China. So if the world is at war with Russia and you are trying to decouple with China, so which other country in the world can be more attractive than India?
Very true. Sir.
So it's law of elimination, because you don't have good relations with others, then India. I'm not saying that India in itself is not attractive, but its attraction there is a force multiplication of its attraction because of Russia and China. Anyway, so sorry, I thought that's.
Thank you, Uncle, and thank you, Professor. I have a question before I pass on the platform to Alok for Q&A section. I was like sitting in the classroom, of my picking or sitting, and we are going to use this video for our students like a textbook, because you covered each and every aspect. Nothing was left. Just like 360 degree, nothing was left. No point is missing. But I am trying to catch one point. As being a guardian of India, you should tell us. I mean, if you happen to advise our foreign minister, whom you know personally, in Beijing, in Singapore, in Hungary, in different parts of the world, he might be very busy. He's not inviting you, but he is well known to you. Sir, there are 2 points. One is Modi's first term. Again, India was growing very fast and we were getting very good responses. Then suddenly, sir, in between, the second wave of COVID came and they said India's story is gone, really. They were writing off India. I mean, I felt that moment since I am into media. So for the time being, I thought I'm not coming back on any TV channel, So India's story was gone for me for the time being. The China wrote it off. India to chala gaya, khatam. Where is Modi wave? But sir, in the second term of Modi, do you think the main difference in India's foreign policy is brought by Mr. Jaishankar? This is one thing. I mean, your knowledge as a academic question. And why don't you take this chance to just make one critical comment that what he should have done better? I mean, you appreciated that. I mean, you didn't criticize India at all. I thought being an Australian, you'll say that India should take a moral stand and be more critical. Because if I'm not a student of diplomacy, I'm not. So I presume India has taken Russia's stand. Right now, India and China is seen with Russia. For any student who is not a student of diplomacy, layman, the layman thinks India is Russia. So sir, please, let us know. I think my question is on behalf of my students also. They will ask next. This is my first question. What, I mean, our policymakers could have done something different, so that the layman will not think India is with Russia. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I became very worried when Dr. Binod Singh said he has got a question, because I have seen him asking questions in various forums in India as well as in China in particular. And people always they get very anxious, what this young man will ask and whether I will be able to answer that question. So I had that moment of anxiety for a minute. Thank you very much for making this public about my meetings with Dr. Jaishankar on many occasions. I think the point is that the appointment of Dr. Jaishankar as foreign minister, one could have different kinds of argument, but I think he's an analyst, a strategist, a diplomat, and also a great negotiator. Right? We know that he was India's ambassador in the US, and the whole nuclear issue was going on in his role. So Mr. Modi had seen Jaishankar's role in action. So it was luck or accident that in one way that Sushma Swaraj passed away and he was looking for a foreign minister and he found Mr. Jaishankar for that position. And he has actually, in my view, well, since you are saying this is being recorded and it will be a classroom
Yes.
kind of teaching, I don't want to share any personal reflection on with my with Mr. Jaishankar. But what I want to say is that you are absolutely right that in the first term there was a lot of excitement in the world about India, and then by the end of the first term, Modi's first term, that excitement had died to a certain extent. And even after Modi's re-election, India was still an attractive country to many, but not in the same uh, intensity as in 2014, 2015. And reason being, I think lots of questions in the West were asked about India's domestic politics, what was going on in India's domestic politics, especially with the change of the status of Jammu and Kashmir, and all kinds of other issues, religious issues in particular. They became bit salient in the West. So on that count as well, I think lots of nations were a bit hesitant as to what Mr. Modi's government was doing. But now with the Ukrainian crisis, and same with China, with the Ukrainian crisis, I mean, we saw India's graphic negative images throughout the world during the first wave of the virus, right? That how people were neglected and, body being burned and floated in the Ganges, all those kinds of negative images. They may not be others, they may not be untrue, I don't know. But lots of media in the West, as well as the Indian media, they highlighted that issue. But I think now with the Ukrainian crisis, those domestic politics and issues have gone in the background from Western perspective. So they are looking at India as a partner and future partner in many, like recently India and Australia, they signed a limited trade agreement. Now, Mr. Modi has reignited the trade agreement negotiation with Europe, for example. And so, in other words, India is again becoming economically active, economically trying to engage, to persuade other nations that India should be a destination for investment, for startups, and all those kinds of things. And given the economies of Western societies and their relationship with China now, they want to diversify, and they say India is a great opportunity. Whether that will happen in a big way, we don't know. It depends upon how India manages its domestic policy and politics. But that's how the West is looking at the moment. Now, one thing Dr. Binod Singh asked, what India could have done better. I think India can do better by doing lots of quiet diplomacy. To me, it seems that at the moment India can see that everyone wants India. So let's talk up India. But talking up India is, I am a Japan specialist or Japan student of Japanese studies. The Japanese have done everything very quietly.
Yes, sir.
and they have achieved a significant status in the world. You know, the Japanese economy is not doing very well.
Mhm.
Japan does not have a attack capacity. It is restricted by its constitution. The constitution does not allow Japan to have a regular military,
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir.
And yet Japan is respected. Of course, in India, in Southeast Asian nations, in the West, in Europe, in Australia, what makes Japan take that much? That is something I think maybe you can, in India, you can think about it and what India can do a little bit differently to earn genuine respect of the world. Um, India is respected very well, right? No doubt about it. And but I think it can do a little bit better by doing some active, not just reactive,
Yeah.
but more active initiatives, which which can be marketed in the world. Like the Japanese have the free and open Indo-Pacific.
Yes.
The Japanese created that and they sold that to the Americans, right?
They're
Of
calling
course,
it. They're calling
right?
it free, liberal, democratic, inclusive, resilient.
That's right. So something like, I don't know. I mean, you can tell me and the Colonel can tell me, what is one thing which we can say that India has contributed to the world in foreign policy?
In,
That's
in the
my
last
question to you.
in the last 2 decades, right, sir? In the last two
Yeah,
decades.
yeah.
And sir, I remember in 2005, you said something about Japan, that Japan economy will not be very dominant. People, protested in that Beijing hotel again. I
Yeah, yeah.
remember that was a
And
topic.
and yeah, and it's not dominant. The Japanese economy is, I mean, it's still the world's third largest economy.
Yeah.
But look, China's economy is 3 times now bigger
Yes.
than Japan and 5 times bigger than India. So,
So I think we need one
but
more session whenever you have time, maybe after a few months. We need one more session with you. Allow me to invite our head HOD, head of department, Bharti ma'am.
is there any student who would like to ask any question?
Yes, yes. Alok, can you start, please? First Bharti ma'am. First Bharti
Yes,
ma'am.
sir, good evening. It is really, I am blessed to listen your talk, sir. I was feeling and I was recalling all the theories of IR, and really I am blessed. And moreover, sir, I'm very optimistic in connection with relations of India with other countries. Always I hope for better. But in this case, sir, when in connection with Russia and Ukraine, of course, Quad countries accepted. They praised and they accepted the India's stand towards Russia, Ukraine, and also our foreign minister Jaishankar sir told that India, everyone is looking at India. Once upon a time, there was a time India was very dependent on others. Now everyone is depending on India. They are looking at India. But now, sir, of course, India is very firmly believing in principles of neutrality and peaceful coexistence. It will never, enter into the war. If you observe the history of India, we can understand. But now, sir, at present scenario, it is a little bit worrying about the India stand. Whether, see, in future, I'm telling, sir, in future, will it affect or will it impact on India in connection with the economic point of view and the military and science and technology? Because India wants to it should be maintain good relations with Russia, because it is also good friend with us, and Quad members also, they are very good with us, and everyone is pressurizing India. Then what will be the future of India?
Okay. Look, I did mention in my talk that it's not, it's some kind of pressure from the West, or maybe kind of persuasion. They are trying, it's a persuasion diplomacy, I said. They are trying to persuade India to come out more clearly and take a clear stand on that. In other words, criticize Russia. But India has made it very clear it's not going to criticize Russia, and it will not. And I said that this explains, in theoretical terms, is India's national interest, which is served by Russia. And none of the other P5 countries, China, namely China, UK, France, and US, India wouldn't trust those nations in the United Nations, right? So it's not just, I mean, a lot of media coverage is about, arms. If you look at the arms, the dependency is reducing. Now, I think when Mr. Modi was in France, I think he agreed to have more Rafale fighter jets from France, right? So India is diversifying its sources, is taking from, of course, from the US, from Europe, from Israel, and God knows, maybe one day from Japan as well, some submarines or something like that. So India is diversifying. If you look at the history of India's dependency on arms from Russia and the former Soviet Union, the graph is going down south, right? But still, it has got such a huge, arms from collection of arms from Russia. They will all need to be servicing. They all need spare parts and so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, India cannot, just cut its relations with Russia by criticizing Russia on that issue. And as Colonel Rajkumar mentioned about, India's position and Russia, the narrative, I don't know what the dominant narrative in India is, but I take Colonel Rajkumar's comment about, that whether Russia was provoked, put in a situation where it had no option. So if that narrative dominates India's position on Ukraine, the government has to also look at the domestic politics of it. If most Indians think that Europe and US, they have not done the right thing, or they have at least provoked Russia into war, then there is no strong domestic constituency for the Indian government. And I'm just referring to this point in the context of, for example, in Japan. There's a huge domestic support. Japanese, by their DNA, post-war DNA, they are against war. They don't like war. They don't want war. And their constitution recognizes that they cannot go to war. Yet, a majority of Japanese are supporting Ukraine, the US, and they think Russia has done something wrong for the humanity, and it's Russia that has gone to war with Ukraine. So I think we need to keep in mind the domestic politics of the Ukrainian war in India and elsewhere.
So there are personal opinions, sir. I don't, it's not the domestic one, but these are my personal opinion. As a retired soldier, when I think of the consequences, sir, because if somebody is the enemies at the gates, how will anybody react, sir? It is just that thought.
Yeah. No. I'm not saying that you are giving Indian government perspective, but I'm saying if that narrative in India, what you have said, is kind of dominant narrative, then the government has to be also mindful of, if like 100% of Indians or majority of Indians come on the street and say we need to support Ukraine against Russia, I think the political scenario in India will change quite significantly. Don't you think so?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, Alok, next, please. And try to be short. Thank you.
Session, I would like to call, first I would like to call Miss Penal to present a question. Yes.
I am Penal Trivedi. I am currently pursuing my MA in International Relations from the Maharajas College, University of Mysore. My question to you, sir, is, will conflicts outside the Indo-Pacific region, such as the Ukraine crisis, threaten the solidarity of the Quad?
Very good question. Wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
You know, like one explanation of the Quad is that the Quad came into existence for the Indo-Pacific region.
Yes.
And it was not about Europe or not about NATO, but all of a sudden, the Quad is now connected or has been made to connect to the European situation, right? And why it has been made to connect to the European situation, because the three other members of the Quad, the United States and Australia and Japan, they are in security, they are in alliance relationship, which is military alliance. And because the US is the key player, Australia and Japan have had no choice but to kind of go with the United States. But India comes in a very difficult situation within the Quad, because India is not in alliance relationship, and India, as a matter of fact, has got close connections with Russia. So to answer your question very briefly, that yes, it will have some implications for the Quad. Right? And we will need to wait and see what happens at the Quad meeting in Tokyo end of this year. Not end of this month. But I think this will be quietly discussed, and when the joint statement comes out, to what extent the Quad joint statement will include the Ukraine war is something we need to see. My view is that it may not come in the statement because of India. India would not like to bring Quad to the Ukraine war.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Welcome.
I would like to call Miss Shrestha to present a question. Shrestha.
Good evening, sir, and thank you very much for sharing your valuable knowledge with us today. I am from the IR department, and my question to you is, sir, whether there are any reason for India's abstention from UNSC and UNHRC votings regarding the Ukrainian crisis going on. If so, what's the reason behind it?
Can you repeat? I couldn't get your question, please.
Sir, whether there are any reason for India's abstention from UNSC and UNHRC votings regarding the ongoing Ukrainian crisis. If so, the reason behind this.
Yeah. So I think, thanks for your question. Yes, yes, India has abstained from voting, displaying its neutrality because it doesn't want to take side. And that was being looked at very negatively from the Western perspective. But India took that decision. What we have been talking about is India's position that India doesn't want, because India is with the US and with Russia. So it didn't want to annoy either of the two. If it voted for the resolution, then it's annoying Russia. If it voted against, it annoys India's main partners in the Indo-Pacific, including Japan, Australia, US, and so on and so forth. So that's the reason, in my view, that India abstained from both organizations when votes were taken. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Our next question is from Harshavardhan. Please.
Good evening, sir. I am Harshavardhan, currently pursuing in Maharaja College, University of Mysore from IR department. First, I would like to say thanks to Professor Purninder Jain sir and Dr. Binod Singh sir, Bharti madam, for giving this opportunity to me. So my question is, how would Russia-Ukrainian war, Ukrainian conflict affect the Indian military system?
Indian?
Military system.
Can I ask Colonel Rajkumar to come here, help me?
Sir, you're the best bet, but this conflict will not affect much as of now. I mean, only it gets prolonged for so long, because if you see last few years since the present government, we have been Make in India policy, and lots of indigenizations taking place. Though we are still dependent for maximum weapons from Russian side, but as of now, Russia is a very strong ally of India, and it will not leave us high and dry. So don't worry on that account. We are in safe hands, and we are also getting some equipment from Ukraine. So the aircraft spare parts are there. There are certain earlier missile systems there, but all said and done, till now it has not affected us. And I'm always that there is always diplomacy which wins the war. So though it's like Professor Jain said, it's about entering the third month now. Very soon we may find a solution. It may be what I feel is that one of the two countries. You may be surprised if Russia also does it on its own, and nobody like to go for such a prolonged war. We'll find a solution soon, sir. I'm always very optimistic on that. Professor Jain, sir.
Wonderful. Well, I think you have answered that question. So, but militarily, I mean, India is not going to involve itself militarily in Europe or in this war. But if your question is about supply of weapons and military hardware, so I will be guided by Dr. Rajkumar saying that, since India has not sided with anyone, Russia will keep supplying to India whatever India wants, Ukraine as well. And of course, India is cutting lots of deals with many other Western countries. And Western countries' economy some of them depend on their arms exports. So they will find, as a matter of fact, I understand, India is the leading importer of arms from the entire world. So the Western world, Western countries also would like to make deal with India to sell their arms. So India is in a good position in terms of if you have got money, there are many sellers to you. So India needs a lot of hard currency to buy. But maybe trade with Russia might change a little bit on ruble-rupee term. Who knows? If that becomes the case, then arms and other things from Russia and Indian export to Russia might increase as well. Thank you.
So our next question is from Bahadur. He's a second year student, and of course he is my batchmate too. Hello, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
This is Batur Arsalan from Afghanistan, a student at Department of International Relations, Maharajas College, University of Mysore. As my questions are, as India follows non-alignment foreign policy, what are the diplomatic and other efforts made by government of India to diminish or diffuse the war situation in Ukraine?
That's a hard question. Well,
He caught us, sir. हम लोग पकड़े गए. There has been a lot of
no. I think I mentioned that in a very different context. And I said, Indian diplomacy needs to become proactive now, right?
Yes, sir.
It's not just reactive, that the world does something, then India says either we will vote for you or against you or become neutral and we are multi-aligned nations. That's okay. That has worked for India so far. But now India needs to be a little bit more proactive. And just by saying, oh, we want to remain neutral, or the West makes rules and they don't follow themselves. But if India can provide some good offices and can say that they can leverage their relationship with Russia and they can leverage their relationship with the US and Japan and do something which will be acceptable to Russia and acceptable to the US. I mean, these are the two nations that matter, as a matter of fact, right? If you can convince the US and convince Russia to come to some kind of, at least to begin with, a truce and then negotiate from there. But I am not aware, I may be in the dark, but I am not aware that India has proposed or is thinking anything along that line. So that will be my take about India, what India can do.
Yes.
It has, instead of being reactive and telling the world what India is all about, if you can devise a plan which will be sellable, you can market, then that will be, what they call peace making or peace building kind of thing. So peace making is something, if India can bring something on the table, that will be the greatest achievement for India's diplomacy, in my view.
Thank you so much, sir.
You are welcome.
But in Afghanistan, we are always active in terms of giving, loans and assistance,
So I would like to call Saheli to present the question.
Go ahead, please.
Good evening, sir. My name is Saheli Chaudhary, and I'm a student of first semester IR department. So my question to you is, the war in Ukraine is drawing Russia closer to China. Thus, China could seek the help of Russia to counter Quad by deepening its footprint in Southeast Asia. In that case, what will be the stand of India?
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, Russia and China, they have become close friends. If you look at the history of China, Russia, or the former Soviet Union relationship, they were friends at one time, then they became almost enemies, they were fighting, and they were competing, and now they have become friends again. So your question about China and Russia getting together against the Quad, I doubt it. I mean, the Russians have been critical of the Quad. And they made it very clear. I was at the Raisina Dialogue in 2020, and the foreign minister of Russia was there, and he made it at the Raisina Dialogue. He said that he didn't support the Quad or the Indo-Pacific because he said it was anti-China. And the Chinese, of course, have criticized left, right, center, the Quad and the idea of the Indo-Pacific. But I don't think that Russia will go to an extent in doing something which will harm India's interests. Not in association with China. China on its own can do and has done and is doing. If you look at China's presence in India's neighborhood, I mean, Maldives now with the change in government, things have changed in the Maldives to a certain extent. But, you know, in Pakistan, in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, so China is already there on India's doorstep, right? And China is very much dominant in Southeast Asia. But Southeast Asian nations, essentially, they have maintained some kind of balance by having very deep relationship with Japan. So Japan is a big balancer for Southeast Asian nations, has been and is still, because the US was kind of withdrew from Asia until we heard about this pivot to Asia under the Obama administration. But to answer your question, I don't see Russia will cooperate with China in trying to design something which will harm India's interests.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome. Nice to know. Okay.
So our last question is from Devika, please.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge, sir. Good evening, everyone. My name is Devika Janartha. I'm currently pursuing MA in International Relations. My question to you is, sir, will the Quad survive the Ukraine test?
Yes. Yes. Short answer is yes, of course it will survive. It's not going to go. I mean, the Chinese, as I said, they once said that the Quad is like sea foam which dissipates in when the next wave comes. But it hasn't dissipated. It's not going to dissipate at all. In fact, it might become even stronger after the Ukrainian war. So it's not going to go away.
Thank you, sir.
So we have many questions, but we definitely know we have to invite you to Mysore and have a face-to-face on dosa and idli. Okay.
I would love to be in Mysore at some stage.
Yes, sir. So because of my throat, I'm asking my colleague Alok to do the vote of thanks formally. So please allow me.
Okay, then
So,
I can just say a few words at the end. Yeah.
Sir, before having a vote of thanks, I must tell you one thing, sir. Really today, I'm very blessed because you solved my all the, sir, questions. Because, yesterday, yesterday we had a discussion in the class. All the students were, they were asking all these questions. How Quad, is related to this issue and all. Now I hope they all are very satisfied and all are very happy. You made me free from all these, pressure, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, let me just say a few words because after the vote of thanks, I don't want to say anything. First of all, it has been an absolute delight to be engaging with all of you, especially students. I took retirement 2 years ago on my own. But one thing I miss my pay packet, but the most important thing I miss is my students. And today it was good to have interactions with students, good to see Your students so articulate, asking questions, not being shy, well prepared, and good questions. So that was excellent. So I must congratulate you that you have got a cohort of students who are so keen to learn about these issues. And thank you again for inviting me. Hopefully, one day I will come to Mysore and interact in person. But certainly, I haven't given all the answers, so students will still keep researching, do their not my view. I always tell my students never feel satisfied with anything. Just keep doing things, researching, and try to validate and invalidate what somebody like me has said this evening. With those words, thank you again, everyone, and good night from me. If you have got something else, I'm here online.
Thank you, sir. We all are waiting for you too, sir. We want to see you in Mysore. Thank you, sir.
It's okay. Alok, please do
Yes.
the honor. Thank you so much.
Yes. My name is Alok Kumar Pathak. I'm second year student of IR department, University of Mysore. A warm and cherished evening to all. It's an honor to give the vote of thanks on behalf of the entire department and BRICS Institute India. For this, today's special keynote speech by Professor Jain Sir, Emeritus Professor, Department of Asian Studies, University of Adelaide, which was of course, a special treatment for all of us. So first of all, without any doubt, this was possible because of our Vice Chancellor support, Professor G. Hemanta Kumar sir. Without his guidance, we could not have gone ahead with this. And of course, the team behind this is Professor Bharti Hiremat ma'am, Head of the Department of International Relations, Maharaja College, University of Mysore, and Dr. Binod Singh sir, Director of BRICS Institute, India. It was very hard to get us a right person who can speak on Indo-Pacific. Luckily, we got a person right from Indo-Pacific, that is from Australia, and who agreed on a much request to speak on our panel. So thank you so much, Professor Jain sir, for your very enlightening speech and insightful lectures. We have learned a lot. We look forward to keep in touch with you and communicate with you. Thank you for guiding us. You are great help for us in our future, of course, in international relations. I thank Professor Anita Vimla Brax ma'am, Principal of Maharaja's College, University of Mysore, for her cooperation. I would further extend a hearty thanks to Brigadier Rajkumar sir for his presence. A special thanks to Dr. Chandranayak sir and Manjunathan sir. So thank you all. Thank you students, teachers, and others who have joined online. Thank you everyone for this online panel discussion. Thank you very much. See you next week, same time on another topic. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Alok. Thank you, Uncle, and we will connect soon.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Sir, Dr. Binod?
I think he's left, ma'am.
Okay. Sir, thank you, sir. Again, it's very good to see you, sir. Thank you so much. Can we leave the meeting, sir? Yeah.
I'm also a student of IR only, ma'am. Diplomacy is a factor which I need to learn. A soldier never does diplomacy, but it's too late to learn diplomacy in life.